Yet they survived. An escape route appeared.
The first Americans arrived here only about 13,000 years ago, and they probably walked from Alaska down a corridor that existed certainly by 11,000 years ago along the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. There may have still been ice to the east and the west, but there was an ice-free corridor that they could have walked down, and they arrived in North America. It was essentially an empty environment from their perspective with lots of rich resources.
A journey that had begun in Africa, divided in Central Asia, had now reached the last continent. For thousands of years, they had endured the most extreme conditions on Earth, and now this branch of mankind had found a new home.
Our ancestors were pretty tough people. They'd survived drought, famine, and an ice age in order to get this far. Yet our genetic results tell us that the first group to make it through to the Americas had been whittled down to as few as 10 or 20 individuals. Today, their descendants are carrying, written in their DNA, evidence of those hardships thousands of years ago. But when they did get through, what was their reward? A land of plenty. They'd never had it so good.
After 10,000 years of struggling through the tundra, these Arctic hunters hit the jackpot. As the ice gave way to the rolling prairies, they found a new land in which to live and prosper. Their numbers swelled, and in only 800 years, they had peopled both North and South America.
I'm off to meet an ancient tribe who traced their family line back to Siberia, to the ancestors of the Chukchi who made that first migration into the Americas. They're the Navajo, and they live here in Canyon de Chelly, Arizona.
The Navajo Indians have been living in North America ever since their Chukchi ancestors first arrived. Canyon de Chelly is one of their most sacred sites. I wanted to tell them about the genetic trail that had led me to them. But I soon learned they had migration stories of their own.
Thanks a lot for inviting me up here to your place.
You're welcome. Enjoy having me.
It's gorgeous here.
We're glad to share the information about our place here.
Can you tell me a little bit about the place, how long you've lived here?
This is the junction of Canyon de Chelly. We got this piece of land from my great-grandfather.
This is our hogan.
We have a story of where we came from, and our story, our origin is a very sacred stories, and it's passed on through generations, and that's your life and your way of where you came from. And I'm sure that these two has some other information too.
Phil Bluehouse explained.
Well, adding to what Letty has to say, there is a creation and journey narrative that we go back to, and this narrative is quite sacred. It talks about the event of creation. We call that Hajine in Navajo, or at the time of beginning.
Do you have any stories about where the ancestors, the ancestors of everyone may have come from?
It depends on how you, there are discussions about migrations. I mean, when we migrate from our mother onto the Earth's surface, that is a migration narrative. I mean, we come from one being to another. That's a migration. If we believe that we were created here in the Four Sacred Mountain area, this is where we came up from the ground. In other words, we were birthed into this place, just like we are all birthed by our mother.
I also have my own sense of what that story might be using science. I'm a geneticist. And everybody around the world is very closely related to each other. We're all part of one big family. In fact, we're all related to people who lived in Africa as recently as 50,000 years ago. That's only about 2,000 generations. So you have distant relatives living all over the world who are essentially African. And you yourselves are essentially African. So am I. Can I show you some pictures of some of the people we've met?
Yep.
These are people known as the San Bushmen who live in southern Africa. And they are some of the oldest people on the planet.
Are these the people that have that clicking sound?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Okay.
Exactly. Fascinating people. Now, the evidence is that the first people who left Africa followed a coastal migration route along the south coast of Asia, and they ended up in Australia. The Australian Aborigines. We visited them.
So you're basing this on the genetic trail?
Exactly.
Now these people who were in Australia, they mainly were more together as a group, you know, like
More cohesive.
more cohesive and
There are lots of different populations in Australia, speaking very different languages. They have different cultures, different myths.
Why do you call something that a people will tell you a myth, as opposed to an experience that they had and they relive it over and over, rather than calling it a myth? Would be able to call it something else, because I have a real strong feeling about that. That, you know, if you call something a myth, it's a substandard event that does not
That's a
have
good
any
point.
relevance, because they are real as we understand them. They're not myths. And
Absolutely. That's a very good point. And my bias as a scientist is that I like to see evidence for things.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was the first migration out of Africa, according to the genetic results that we got. Now the next one followed a slightly different route, one that went inland.
I'm getting pretty good at this.
And
Of
they
course,
ended up
it
in
helps that I
Central
brought the
Asia.
family album along.
And this man is a direct descendant of a person who lived in Central Asia about 35 to 40,000 years ago.
Wow.
And his ancestor is also the ancestor of most Europeans and Native Americans.
Wow.
He's a man called Niazov, who lives in Kazakhstan.
Are you the same person that did some research I noticed on the internet that says that the Native American people are somehow connected to
Yes.
Central Europe,
Yes, Central Asia.
Central Asia?
Yeah, that was a
Wow.
paper that we published last year.
Okay. That's good to know.
What do you think of that?
You know, and I was looking at a book from people from Central Asia, and I saw my cousin Emmett and Abraham, Auntie Grandma Buggy, and I said, my God, I got family over there in Central Asia. These were the
People like
Mongolian
this.
people.
yeah.
They're Central Asians.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
That's it right there. In the eye, he looks like Oriental, and then he's got Negro features to some extent, and also Caucasian, kind of all mixed together. So that's interesting, very interesting.
These are the Chukchi people, and they're your
They're still
distant
in
cousins.
Siberia.
They're still living in northeastern Siberia. I visited them recently
Oh, they're the ones that have
With the
this
reindeer.
with the reindeer. Yeah.
Reindeer. I've seen them on TV.
Their home is
They're
Yeah, the home looks like a
looking.
teepee. And the results show that they are your ancestors. They ultimately made that trip across the Bering Strait into the Americas.
Wow.
about how tall were these guys here?
About 5'8", 5'6", 5'8". Yeah,
About
not too
tallest?
tall. Yeah. And by looking at the genetic data, we can estimate that as few as 10 or possibly 20 people were in that first group, the first wave of migration into the Americas.
My story about the journey of man came as no surprise to these Navajo. The idea of migration had been central to their own creation story since the beginning of time.
The point is that somehow we're finally acknowledging one another from the scientific realm and from the traditional realm, saying that, yeah, the puzzle is starting to fit together.
And we complement each other.
And we're all complementing each other.